We will now move on to R2, receiver presentation from the Blueprint for Public Safety, City of Reading Police Chief Robert Galetti, and the City of Reading Fire Chief Jerry Gray, addressing the Tier 1 through 5 focus areas as prioritized on the initial BPS report. Gentlemen, may I ask you to propose? Tom, are you starting?
So I will go ahead and kick this off on my, before I turn it over to Supervisor Modi. What we're looking for here is for the Board of Supervisors to receive the recommendations from each of the presenters and the implementation team, and then direct staff, if any, direction to either agree, disagree with those recommendations, or add to them. Then I believe Super.
Do a quick introduction. I just want to remind everybody that after the matrix study was done, we did develop a blueprint implementation team, which consisted of Councilmember Weaver, Reading City Manager Kurt Starman, CEO Larry Lees, Police Chief Rob Paletti, Fire Chief. The purpose of this blueprint implementation committee was to look at the original matrix plan. The plan was not the end of the process, it was actually the beginning of the process. It was meant to be, I believe, a sort of session, and what I think occurred was an open and direct and very productive discussion amongst the 6 members of the team to look would work well for us. And just as a reminder, we covered the Tier 0 plan here about 2 months ago. Cash flow attached to it, but certainly staff time and some amount of money, but those agreed with maybe 95% of those recommendations. Now we're looking at the tiers 1 through 5. These are the ones that forward and how we would want to do that and where that money would come from. And I would point out that even in the matrix plan, they had is that if as money became available or was found in some manner. So today's discussion, Sheriff, as well as Mr. Lees will discuss some of the social support services discussions that we had, and then then share our ideas on how to fund those. I will say that all 6 members are squarely behind these recommendations. We came to an agreement across the board on the issues that we're going to present to you, and I think now it's time to start with those ideas.
Perfect. Mr. Kehoe, would you like to?
Yes. I have a question of Supervisor Modi or Mr. Lees relative to the recommendations. Recommendation number 2, approving concept the implementation team's proposed action plan. Now, does this board do that germane to social support services in Shasta County Sheriff's Office, or do we do it also for the City of Reading?
Recommendations or wants to amend any of the discussion that we have. What we're looking for there is acceptance of the recommendations as presented by
the City of Reading.
Correct.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Kehoe. Other questions? Mr. Vaughn.
So adding on to that question too, and including finance methods.
Yeah, as you noticed within the presentation to the Board of Supervisors, although we've identified the need for revenue if we are to complete these recommendations or fulfill these recommendations, certainly if you notice the City of Reading is going to be addressing that topic as it relates to the need and perspective for additional revenue.
Good, so we're not avoiding the tax idea.
Correct.
Thank you.
And I would add, I think there'll be some worthwhile discussion when we get to that.
Perfect. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Now we move forward with, who's starting?
I would.
Okay. Thank you.
Does that plug in? I'm going to, we just tried it about 10 minutes ago.
Just hold on for a few technical difficulties here.
going to continue on. The best lead plan. So if you would go to the first slide for me, please. Go to the next slide. Or next one. Our goal here was to address all the needs. So is it working now? You went too far. Next one. No. Right there. Oh. So is it working now or? Okay. So the idea for the implementation team was to take every something that we felt was appropriate, something that was affordable, is the best use of our resources, and I wanted to lay that groundwork as I go through the 4 social support issues that with that. The first one was the master plan development, and in this case the recommendation from Matrix was to go forward with a master plan that would coordinate some of the nonprofits, some of the health and human services, of how best to travel to impact those folks that are in need, whether it be mental health. We've actually already started this, and we've done this without spending the $150,000. So as we started this strategy about in November or December when the Matrix was finalizing their report. Hospitals, and we've actually have gone forward on implementing some things, and we're in the process of studying the results of those implementations. We know that we had an impact of those folks that might be suffering from some type of mental disability. Response, the police department response, the sheriff's response, the jails. And with that, we have started a pilot project where we've actually put mental health workers within the emergency 2 months now, and we're getting very, very good results with that. The purpose of their position in there, now this is in conjunction with the hospitals, the purpose of their position there is to identify placement for particular individuals that are showing signs of some type of either 5150 or other disabilities. We've gotten reports back from the emergency rooms, the directors of the emergency rooms, and the CEOs of both hospitals, and they're very supportive of this plan. It's just one little part. You know, there's a lot more out there, but we have a meeting scheduled to where we'll be reviewing the results of that. My point to this recommendation is that, yes, we have gone forward, but we've gone forward without spending the $100. At the end of this, as we get the results from our pilot programs, and we'll be looking at some other things too, as we get the result, if at that time it is determined that, you know what, we do need to do more to consolidate, and yeah, we want to consider a $150,000 study, we certainly have that option to come back at that recommendation to go forward with the $150,000 study, because we feel we've already gone forward with that collaboration. Number 2 is the crisis stabilization unit recommendation. Now, Matrix actually made this recommendation, tier recommendation. The implementation team believed that that was not good enough, that we wanted to attack right away, or at least consider right away. So with that being said, moving it up to funding being identified, but we know that the need is out there today. We believe that this is sheriff responses as well as jail and emergency room hospitals. And so we wanted to go forward, but I think it's important that we understand, wanted to take 1 second so people understand what we're talking about here. And first of all, let me mean that it's not a mental health facility where people are put there for months on end. A calmer environment to where we have the opportunity. Some people refer to it as a 23-hour, but what it is, it's an hour. They have to be medically cleared. Once medically cleared, someone that might be suffering might be designated as somebody's crisis stabilization unit where they can be stabilized, just what it says. It's typically a 23-hour facility in the state of California, but it gets them out of the emergency room. It gives us an opportunity to stabilize them. Typically, there is a nurse as well as a psychiatrist, and then there's other staff involved that need to be there for the protection of, in case someone acts out. And so the crisis stabilization unit is not a long-term mental health. The downside, or certainly the red flag with the crisis stabilization unit, is the fact that once they're released from let's say a hospital emergency room or have been medically cleared and it is determined that this is the treatment that they need, when they go there, as we work to stabilize them and get them on their meds, if it is a severe case of some type of mental disability that is going to require a bed, the community. And so with that being said, that's where lies the problem, is we don't have a lot of held there longer than intended and longer than we have the room to, or the resources to manage. But that is the crisis stabilization unit. We're looking at going in there, and it's about a $2 million annual cost. It's not cheap because of the staffing, the fact that you need some type of nurse. We can restructure within the county and certainly support $1 million towards, will be outlined later, of another $1 million that could come from some type of increase in revenue, whether it be sales. I do want to make mention, as we're talking about the CSU, this is another thing though that we have moved to this Board of Supervisors, again, not wanting to wait, but to get started with something. We jumped into what we call the Mental Health Resource Center. And the Mental Health Resource Center is, and for lack of a better term, I'll just call it a drop-off center. Control officer drops somebody off, providing they're medically cleared. Sheriff, a parent can drop somebody out and say, I don't know how to deal with this. We think that they're on the verge of a mental health crisis. Now, this is not someone that would be already identified as 5150. It might be someone who was at one time and has now been on their meds and everything's going well, and then for some reason there was a distraction in their life where some poor choices were made. With that being said, this gives us the Resource Center will give us an opportunity to provide this drop-off place for us to monitor, see if we can't get stabilized, back on their meds, and then release them. It's not meant for long-term stay or even 23-hour stay, but it is a place that will be available 24 hours a day. So at 3 in the morning, if someone's wandering the street, we might be able to, that might be in disarray. We could have an opportunity to stabilize them and get them back to where they can be taken care of. The other important part about the Mental Health Resource Center is that this also is where we're implementing, or we'll be working our Laura's Law. The Board of Supervisors directed this county to go forward with implementing Laura's Law. We adopted that law, and that is where you have an opportunity for not only foster parents, but as well as parents that might have older adult children that are in the need of some direction as it relates to their mental disability. And because of that, that will be all incorporated in this resource center. Now that is something that the county is picking up. We've gone out for RFP. We've either awarded the RFP or we're going to any day now, and we expect that to be up and running within a month or two. So that's something I think it's important we point out, that we just didn't wait for the report to come back and say, okay, now what do you want to do? That we actually took action and started moving forward. Next slide, please. Was the recommendation for the Sobering Center, and I need to point out to the board that if those of you who are following along in your packet, you will note that the Sobering Center was originally part of the jail recommendations, that they wanted to report in the jail recommendations, and this is something that the implementation team felt that we needed to move over to services because we believe it fit there. Now, I do want to mention that the sheriff has also taken the ball here and ran with it in the with opening a sobering cell within the Shasta County Jail. So we have opened that sobering cell, I believe another implementation milestone that we've met. And we actually started our first, it was in about the middle of February when we started that. So we're up and running with the sobering cell. But I wanted to go a little further because the recommendation really talked to a sobering center. And this is another one of these things where you need to address what is a sobering center as opposed to what some might be thinking of a detox center or a drug and alcohol rehab center or something like that. There's really clean clothes, shower, food, sleep it off, and so we too, the implementation, believe that the need is there. The city of Reading is out for a startup, and that was the $375,000 about that they were talking about for potential startup of a sobering center. But with that, again, it's something that the implementation team did not want to wait on, and so we have actually a lot of discussions and community meetings going on already, where we have talked about ways that nonprofits could step in and run the sobering center. Will be a detox or drug alcohol rehab, and keeping in mind, sobering center is just that. It's where you go to get sober. It's not where you go to get fixed. And so we have the need. There is provided, currently within Shasta County that I know of, there is only one really detox type rehab place, and that would be the Empire Recovery Center, right currently within Shasta County. But certainly I think that is continues to be something that we'll need to look at as potential recommendations going forward. But right now for the sobering center, we are continuing to work with these nonprofits to determine if it might be a better joint partnership with them. And I will say this, studies have found, we have found this throughout the state of California, let alone the nation, that nonprofits have maintained sobering centers and have them be successful, especially they appear to be a lot more efficient.
Thank you, Ms. Lees. Could you clarify on the report, you mentioned the $375,000 is listed under the column ongoing annual cost. If that was the intention for it to be in startup costs, and what are the ongoing annual costs?
No, the ongoing annual costs have not been identified. That $375 was for startup only, and so what we're looking, this is why we're in the partnership with some of the nonprofits, and we're hoping that they will be able to utilize some type of nonprofit funding or additional medical, but there has been no ongoing operating cost identified.
Okay, so it's just in the wrong column. Great. You mentioned that this was not, I'd like to put it out there, I think that even if it's not a fix-it station, there still could be the recommendation for services available to the community. I don't want us to ignore that.
No, absolutely. And keeping in mind, our goal here, you're right, our goal here was to respond to the matrix report, but yet you can see where we believe that we needed to differ. We're expanding that, and that's why I mentioned detox and rehab. And you're right on that. The sobering center could absolutely be that referral center for those type of services.
Well, the point that you made especially kind of brings it home. You mentioned that nonprofits have a tremendous success rate. We have a 78% recidivism rate in our county system in the jail, and you take a place like Teen Challenge with an 80% success rate, just the opposite. So there are opportunities to combine the community services and nonprofit in the county.
That concludes the support services issues, recommendations, and as you can see, the summary of those is, number one, go forward with the crisis stabilization unit and the sobering center once the revenue has been identified.
Perfect, thank you. Mr. Lees, I just had a word project. Thank you. Mr. Keon.
Mr. Lee's presentation together. Under the column projected completion date, the first is the fourth quarter, and then skipping the second, the third and fourth both identify January 2016, and in progress is on the Mental Health Stabilization Center. We have there to be determined. Now, members of the public who are very supportive of this type of approach will look at to be determined, and it sort of diminishes any hope that they may have that this will be implemented in the very near future. So can you give us your impression on when this can go online, and for the board and the public, that we would adjust funding mechanisms to make this a reality for our community?
Well, I think the second question is a question for you and your peers to answer. To answer the first question, as far as me to put in a date, it would be misleading for me to put in a date when I know that funding has not been identified. So that's the reason. Vary from the matrix recommendation by addressing it. So we want to make sure that we address the recommendation specifically, which is what we did. But I can't put in a date of when that would happen until we've identified the revenue to support it. That revenue has not been identified yet. It doesn't mean we're not doing things, clinicians inside the emergency rooms at the hospitals. But it does mean, as it relates to the crisis stabilization unit,
Well, you have indicated in your presentation that we believe that there is $1 million. Is it a matter of finding new funds, or is it a matter of reordering the funds that we do have to come up with the second $1 million?
well, certainly we don't have dollars in reserve to be able to do that, but we could take dollars from other programs if this became a higher priority.
Thank you.
Thank you. Sheriff, welcome.
Good morning, Chairman, Jack Lee, members of the board, Thomas Sanko, Shasta County Sheriff. Continuing with our presentation, we have the sheriff's component, which matrix focused on custody issues for the jail, primarily the jail, and its impact with the other agencies as well. Their recommendation was to increase the bed space, double the bed space at the proposed adult rehabilitation center that is in process right now, and increase it from 64 beds, 96, or 128. You may recall that this was presented before you, and the board chose not to move forward with the 128-bed model. Right after the board's decision, we were down in Sacramento presenting those plans for the 64-bed facility. We are about 1 year into the architectural plans, and about $1 million or more have been spent on those architectural plans right now. So if you were to bring this back forward and say, let's change to 128 beds, that would require the architectural plans to be changed. It would require additional funding, and then it would delay the project at least by 1 year to double that bed space there. Certainly it can be done. But it would also delay it. We need those beds now. So in an alternative plan, the team spoke about, there has been some plans and some studies done to convert the basement of the jail. Currently, the basement of the jail holds our laundry facilities and our kitchen. Those operations will be transferred to the Adult Rehabilitation Center once it is opened up and operational. And that could be converted for bed space and very much needed program space for continuing on of AB 109 and the funding we received to work with inmates on a rehabilitation. And that can also work within jail when they are in custody. And then if they go to a minimum security facility such as the ARC, it can continue there. Upon their release, if they were on a work release program, those services can continue there. And then once off and they've served their sentence, they're still on probation, and those services can still continue. So hopefully you have a seamless continuum of those rehabilitative services and programs from almost the moment they enter into jail. We very much need the bed space. In the 1990s, we saw the closures of Crystal Creek Men's Camp, which was a work camp, fire camp facility, and the closure of the detention annex, losing over 150 beds for incarceration. We have had capacity releases at the jail since 1993. Roughly about 3,000 or so people are released to the county from the jail in overcrowding situations. There have been feasibility studies that have said right now we're over 100 beds short to have those beds available. So there's consequences and accountability for inmates from when they get arrested. If the court didn't make their appearances in court, those people sometimes fail to appear. They need to be incarcerated and held. Or if they go back, whether it be for drunkenness, DUI, burglaries, oftentimes burglars, thieves, get released and they go right back out and recidivate again and come back in. So we do need that additional jail bed space. There's about 6,000 square feet in the basement that could be redeveloped and changed to about 64 bed facility there. And then, as you know, the Superior Court has been approved and is moving basically across the street from the existing courthouse. Departments 1 and 2 are part. There's also some studies that those areas could be converted to bed space as well, dormitory style housing. Currently, the courts make up about, the departments 1 and 2 in the lobby area there within the facility make up about 10,000 square feet. So departments 1 would hold about 64 inmates as well, bringing that back up. And then also department 2, and using those lobby areas there, they would be adjacent to the jail, which makes it convenient as well. It may not have the efficiencies of scale being next to each other if we did the conversion of the basement first, and then later say department 1, but it is getting us additional jail bed space and making use of facilities that we have. Certainly the sobering center can help, but again, those are usually for like cooperative drunks that can get taken in and then released and hopefully get further assistance, but there are the ones that still need to be arrested and incarcerated. That's what that sobering cell for is, to sober those people up, get them stabilized, that they get released. May or may not be pending court, depending on what the officers or the district attorneys want. And then there's a need within the jail also to have specialty beds, which are referred to as mental health beds, for those inmates that need additional mental health services and are still awaiting some type of actions within the court or criminal justice system. And many of the jails throughout California recognize those needs and try and do some conversions there. All that would require additional revenues, both for the remodeling and for the staffing of those operations. It would be about $1.7 million to operate each of the 64 beds. We could go up to 196. And then a square foot, it does seem expensive, but it also, we have the existing facility there with its foundation. Our Public Works Director, Pat Minturn, regarding that remodeling, he's usually pretty spot on a rough estimate. We are seeing an escalation in building costs right now, and that's we are seeing that the escalation in building costs to expand it out would be somewhere between $6+ million if we decide to go back to that 120 there. The Matrix recommended increasing our public safety service officer staff a number of years ago, back in the late 90s, early 2000s. The jail went through a remodel, and that remodel changed, operated, which allowed taking staff off those modules in the evening hours, and then streamline the staff there. The inmates and the officers that are in the jail are monitored from one main control panel in the evening hours. That person also operates the intake Sally Port area for the cars coming in. It's very chaotic. That is a officer safety risk and inmate safety risk of trying to do all those multitask at once. Matrix recommended putting those service officers back up on the panel staff. I fully concur with that, not only for inmate safety, but for officer safety as well when the officers are in those areas. It also would add for the safety and security of the jail. You may recall that we did a slight organizational reorganization a few months ago, and we're working on replacing some of these service officers, not all in the jail, with correctional officers to work on those levels. And it allows more flexibility within the jail, that a correctional officer can work on a control module and also work in housing unit. There is some additional cost with that. And I do concur with Matrix with increasing that night shift staff, especially now with the type of inmates that we see incarcerated due to AB 109, long-term inmates, more sophisticated inmates, some with a lot of prison time, and so we're seeing kind of a mini prison culture within the jail. We have seen increases with inmate on inmate assaults and also inmate on officer assaults, weapons making within the jail, but that's not uncommon throughout the state of California since AB 109 was implemented, and many of the other sheriffs are seeing similar actions take place in their jail. Matrix recommended increasing electronic monitoring or ankle bracelets in a different tier system. Right now, we have available 100 ankle bracelets that have GPS monitoring. Probation also has about 100 ankle bracelets. Normally, we average about 75 to 80 ankle bracelets in use at any given time. If we were to go to 100, we can obtain more of those bracelets. The Sheriff's Office, we operate on a involuntary method for the ankle bracelets, which requires us to pay the charges for the monitoring of the ankle bracelets and their use. The reason we choose involuntary is because many times the inmates are not of a financial ability to pay or offset the cost of an ankle bracelet, and also we want to be able to say, no, you're going to be wearing this, you have failed to show up for a work program, and you're going to be monitored for that. Most of the time, the people that are incarcerated do not have the financial ability to pay for that, and that's why we use an involuntary method. We did not recommend expanding out the ankle bracelets at this time because there's not a need for it, and then also with the ability to pay for the inmates. The increased jail alternatives for the Community Correction Center Advisory Board for Inmate Industries, we do recommend that there is some type of a business plan. Many previous boards ago in the late 1990s, the board received a community corrections plan presented by then Sheriff Pope and under Sheriff Schaller. The board accepted. There was a number of recommendations on how to build some type of inmate industries. They recommended it. Of course, it did not have the financing. Since then, we have been moving forward with a partnership with Shasta College, Probation Department, Good News Rescue Mission, and the Sheriff's Office for the Step Up program. And that's where inmates, probationers, and then clients of the Good News Rescue Mission can work on obtaining certificate programs at Shasta College or working on getting their degree. Some of the certificate programs are in office administration, welding, and heavy equipment operations in automotive technology. We've since expanded that out to most of the other programs operating at Shasta College. The Shasta College recently obtained a federal grant that expands that out, and although we're going to continue to work with that. So then we're working on that business plan to obtain some type of vocational skills for the inmates as well, and also probation is working on job vocational skills for their clients and hoping that they can go out once they get rehabilitated, up on their feet, drug and alcohol free, and be able to become a productive citizen versus being recidivizing and coming back into the system, which can be very expensive. The Sheriff's Office has a custody emergency response team. It's very similar to a SWAT team, but for in jail use. Matrix recommended that we add some people to the CERT team, and it would be about an additional $60,000 for the training and additional deputies that would be on that CERT team there. They work on inmates that are either barricaded in their cell, refusing to move, riots within the jail. Unfortunately, we have not had riots anytime recently, and so they do train and work on that regularly. It'd be about a $60,000 cost to train and equip those officers, and then with the additional officers that are on there, they could be divided among the shifts, so at least there are some officers on all the shifts 24 hours a day to deal with the smaller incidents that may not need personnel to be called in or full team response. And that concludes my portion of the presentation. Are there any questions?
Thank you, Sheriff. Any questions, Mr. Chappelle?
Thank you, Chairman. I was looking at the area where it was increased bed space. Looks like preliminary was the ARC discussion for the 128 beds, and then you addressed the alternative, which was the alternatives to remodel the jail basement and the courtroom 1 and 2. That alternative, unless I missed it in this blueprint study, is not addressed in this study. Is that correct?
Matrix did not look at the use of the courtrooms or the basement. We as a team were aware of those studies, and as an alternative to expanding out the ARC, chose to move forward so it would not delay the ARC, chose to provide those alternatives for up to 128 beds or higher by using the courtrooms or the basement of the existing jail.
Okay, but again, I don't see it in here. How would we address it if it's not in this plan? I mean,
It is not within the plan, but it's in with our recommendations to look at using the basement of the jail or the courtrooms, expanding those into medium security dormitory style housing. And if the funding becomes available, not only to build those additional beds, but also
it can be addressed in a future issue.
it can be, again, most importantly, if the revenue and operational costs.
The 64 beds in the current jailhouse, some sort of a time frame to build that. Do you have any idea if you have the funding currently?
Within the jail, of course, we have to anticipate that the Adult Rehabilitation Center will be completed in late 2018, a couple of years from now, and then we could, if the funding is available and dedicated for it, move forward at making those conversions.
Okay, and approximately what kind of time would that take?
I'm gonna say, I don't wanna pin it down, I'm not
I mean,
being,
in the ballpark, I'm not looking for.
let's say at least a year, because we have to develop plans for that, and then of course, the actual construction part. And so I'd have to get a little more precise.
We did the additional 64 beds in the ARC, or we do this really at the same time frame?
Yeah, a little over a year, but you remember we have to get the ARC built and operational because the kitchen moves from the basement of the jail to the new ARC center. So we have to have that operational before we go in and clear out the basement of the jail.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying, is we're looking at pretty much the same time. One of the problems with it, extending with this, we're probably adding an additional 3 years.
Perhaps, I don't have an estimate on that.
Thank you.
That's the same question, Sheriff. Can you ballpark or be a little more specific about the cost of construction and the cost of supervision? You've got two facilities, so you have two separate supervision points, one in the basement of the jail and one in the Justice Center. The layout that we're looking at, so.
If you were going to build and operate for construction remodeling for 64 inmates, it would run at least $4 million, $104.1 million. For 128 inmates, $6.8 million. And if you were going to go to 192, 64 times 3, so it'd be departments 1 and 2 in the basement, that would go up to nearly $11 million annually. And that included the one-time remodel cost, the ongoing staffing operations. These are based, say, in jail medical costs or anything like that.
Okay, so I just heard you say $11 million annually. What are you referring to?
That would include the care and of the inmates, feeding them, the additional medical care for them, the officers to run those types of facilities if you have all 3 of those running. And so that would be an operational cost for 192 inmates occupying departments 1 and 2 and the basement.
So then are these costs, they're not considered on these attachments we're looking at? City of Reading is going to be addressing a proposed sales tax increase and some sort of a division of those available finances if it were approved by the voting public. Are those monies for additional bed space, at least the first phase, let's say the basement or some such configuration, and the supervision, are they specifically included in the proposals the City of Reading will be looking at today and covered by a sales tax initiative?
I will be giving a presentation later today to the Reading City Council, and that depends on the actions that the legislative bodies take on how much money to generate, whether it be a quarter cent, half cent, 3/4, 1 cent, of how much that would generate annually. And of course, it would depend on the economy at the time of how sales are going along, because it's the sales tax, it's based on purchases there. So there's a lot of variables.
So here's my confusion. I hear you saying it, and I understand you presented the figures, and you talked about cost, well, maybe the question is more appropriate for our representative on the Blueprint Grant, Supervisor Modi. Are we suggesting, is the Blueprint Committee suggesting inclusion of some bed space on the approach through sales tax initiative? Will some of those monies go specifically for the construction of and for the maintenance of, in other words, ongoing costs?
Yeah, and first let me just clarify, because I'm not quite sure I understood what the sheriff was saying about the 11 million, because he's talking about 11 million, but I think part of that is meant to be one-time construction costs.
Yes, I did explain that it would be part of the remodeling and then
Yeah.
part of the
So
ongoing.
let's clarify how much is construction versus how much
Thank
is
you, because that was
ongoing.
lost there too.
And perhaps if you don't have that, perhaps Mr. Lees or Mr. Starman might have it.
Yeah, I have it on a spreadsheet.
I think Mr. Starman is.
Here we go. Thank you, Rick.
Thank you, Madam Chairman, members of the board. So with regard to a couple of questions, maybe so I can clarify as well. First of all, Kurt Starman, City Manager for the City of Reading. My recollection, I should have brought my notes with me from my seat, but I didn't. I think I have this on my memory. So there is a distinction, as Supervisor Miller just mentioned, between one-time construction costs and ongoing operations. Let me start with the operations. I think that's of keen concern to the board.
Absolutely.
My recollection is that the projection from the sheriff and Captain Brashears was to operate 64 beds in the basement was about $1,070,000 annually in 2016 dollars. And then similarly, if one half of the Justice Center is converted to an additional 64 beds, there was a similar cost projection for that as well, about $1,070,000 per year for that as well. And then to complete the thought, there was a projection that ultimately, and this is not the current recommendation from the implementation, the Justice Center to a full 128 beds. And in that situation, there would be some economies of scale and efficiency. And my recollection is for about, or you can add the additional 64, let me put it that way, for about an additional $700,000 annually. So those are kind of the breakout. So more beds in the basement, $1,070,000 for 64 additional beds in the Justice Center, and about $700,000 to build a third set of 64 beds. My recollection relative to construction costs, and this is into the jail basement, was projected to be about $3 million in total. That's design and construction, and the renovation or projected to be about $2.5 million. That includes design as well as construction.
Thank you, Mr. Starman. So we would need assistance to do the capital, and we would look for some assistance as far as operation recommendation from the committee if additional revenues are brought in by the City of Reading.
So the recommendation to the Reading City Council today is, of course, the City Council will receive a very similar presentation, identical for all intents and purposes to what you're discussing this morning, but there'll be a second part. And the second part will be the consideration of a potential one-half transactions and use tax for the November 2016 ballot. Is, to answer that question that came up earlier specifically, is the strong recommendation from the implementation team that the City Council do place a one-half cent transactions and use tax on the November ballot. And the specific recommendation from the implementation team is that the funds I mentioned earlier be allocated for 64 beds in the basement, 64 beds in the Justice Center, and then the associated operating costs. So that is the recommendation, and Reading City Council will be discussing that recommendation today at 2 p.m.
And that tax would generate enough to be able to cover that and all the other needs that we're discussing here.
Correct.
Thank you very much. I appreciate the clarification.
Thank you, Mr. Starman.
You're welcome.
Mr. Woody? Did you?
Yes. I just wanted to follow up on a question that came up from Supervisor Chappelle about the intimate space, and you said maybe about 3 years later. I just want to clarify that. As Sheriff Kazenko came on board, that allows the basement to be vacated with the laundry and the food services. Within November, if we're going to have funding to do any of this, I'm sure that the sheriff and as the ARC was built and the jail and laundry was moved out, we'd already have all the architectural and engineering plans done and just be well within that year. And so in reality, what you're talking about is, maybe 12. And as you mentioned, Sheriff, we're several years out from the ARC being finished as well.
Correct, and you're right, working on the architectural plans and be ready essentially the day after we move the kitchen facility.
And the thing that I like about this plan, as part of our discussion, we all, I agreed upon this, is this plan gives us the need coming on board. As the Sheriff mentioned, we certainly have a need for it now. But how much more we're going to need 3 years from now, 5, convert one of the departments into 64 beds, and if it continues to be needed after that, convert another department over to another 64 beds because of Prop 47 and other issues, and we don't need additional jail space. We're not building 192 additional beds. Ability as we move forward. Certainly, you look back at the ARC and could we have built more beds? And sure, but as I remind you, that's and today we don't have the money to do this either, unless the additional revenue is found.
Thank you for that clarification.
Continuing your thought of flexibility, at different points, the sheriff has pointed out the need in the jail, potentially in the jail for folks that are incarcerated and have mental disabilities. Is there enough flexibility in that space? At one time, we identified the basement as potential for that. Has that discussion occurred? Is there enough flexibility in the dollars and the type of construction that we could accommodate a part of that, or?
Yeah, I
what are your thoughts?
certainly see that with, again, the community felt that certainly we want to look at adding maybe 128 beds, but leaving that Department 2, that third option, gives us a lot of flexibility, I think, to we need more jail space, we need more for mental health issues, that kind of stuff. I could, and the Sheriff, you mentioned having some additional space for programming and rehabilitation of his prisoners, and may want to do that. If that comes around, I could see, actually, I see Department 2 being converted to jail space. So you now have your jail space upstairs in Department 1 and 2. Now you have an economy of scale because they're close to, proximity to each other, and then going back and changing out part of the basement if you need to for additional programming space, mental health cells.
Thank you very much. Any other questions for the sheriff at this point? No? Thank you very much. Oh, Larry. Sorry.
I'm going to jump in here in fact, I'm going to come down.
Uh-oh. That must mean something, right?
Yeah.
You missed your item.
I just. So in our transfer of technology, we skipped a slide, and so I'm going to slide, and I wanted to make sure that it was covered. And it was the public amenity did absolutely point out that they believe there should be an investment made for additional public amenities for the home. And so what the implementation team did was they took a look at this, and prior to that, the city of Reading actually, direction of their city, went forward in opening up some public restrooms right downtown where they determined the need was greatest at this particular time. There might be an opportunity for additional resources. However, we also know that right now, in conjunction with the continuum of care that's taken place, and we know that Councilmember Schrader, acting not as a council member but as an individual, is going her proposal on what might a perfect homeless continuum of care operation look like. We need, as an implementation team, need to come back and may be addressed this once we get the results of that report. But I did want to make you realize that, yeah, we did address it. This is what we looked at. The city jumped right on it, provided the public restrooms right away, and then with the report that will be coming to the council and the board of supervisors here within probably 3 weeks.
Thank you very much.
Expand on that a little bit, because we did talk quite a bit about the homeless issue in general, and we thought that the sobering center we could have on that as well. And then, as Mr. Lee talked about, we're all looking forward to Ms. Schrader's report on her own, be available through the private sector, which is what she's been trying to do. And we certainly didn't want to get in the middle of recreating a bunch of fits into this whole piece later on.
Thank you very much. Chief Gray.
County Supervisors, Jerry Gray, City of Reading Fire Chief. Thank you again for having me here and on this very worthy project. One thing that became very, inadequacies or challenges. So we have this comprehensive plan before us. The fire department plan was actually pretty straight. 98% of the matrix recommendations were recommendations that we felt very comfortable with. Was staffing challenges. These are well known and go back for decades in our department. So the plan to our elected bodies, yourself included, and our community, and move forward in a positive manner in this. So the Reading Fire Department was awarded a very much needed grant, a safer grant, and I know you're familiar with it because you've had it in your county. Enhanced staffing to national levels. We put that money to good use, and positions that we had hired with this grant were absorbed temporarily on, and so we believe the intent of the matrix plan was to enhance the firefighters. So the implementation team has added this as an addition. It was not included in the original. Buying this as a high priority item so that on whatever other recommendations matrix had, we didn't slide back. So this item was not in the matrix report, but the implementation team felt very strongly that we needed consistent with the matrix philosophy of enhancing our staffing. The next one is to bring, in 2007, size 50,000 to 100,000, only 4% did not staff their engines with 3.0 minimum. Some have gone even further. This is not about being like the Joneses. Oh, they have it, so we need to have it. Reflection of the specific tasks that we expect our firefighters to perform once at the scene. Obviously a costly and ambitious enhancement, but it would have far-reaching benefits for our restructure our alarms assignments so that when our engines are committed to significant left. Currently, the other night, Blue Oak Drive, we had a second alarm structure fire. Every single engine, or a population of nearly 100,000 people. It's very unnerving to have the viciousness of our mutual aid system and the Palisade engine that came into the city of Reading and augmented our protection for a fire chief to have to deal with. So this will make some substantive improvements to our department, and adding a fire inspector is a very high priority to our department. We have two, and the workload has become immense in that department. The implementation team has recognized this material presentation. There was a recommendation by Matrix to enhance our public outreach and public tie in with that Tier 0 recommendation and check the boxes on both. Our company is a national standard. It's a costly one. We currently run the only ladder truck. The district has purchased a truck. They will have it in service within the next month. We welcome that second addition with all of our jurisdictions. It is staffed with 3 firefighters. We would like to take it to full recommendation, but as we evaluate the overall package, we just feel that there are competing public safety. Wildland engines, this was to staff 2 wildland engines, almost could, again, the implementation team thinks this is a great idea, so does this fire chief, but add that during peak fire danger periods, what we call red flag days, we do have departments do as well to kind of meet the higher risk for our community. This one is a very intriguing model. Some departments in our nation have gone to this attack. And the answer to that is, well, because while they're at that heart attack, the next fire call, go back to the station, swap gear, swap equipment, and respond to the fire call. In departments with adequate staffing, this is a wonderful model that actually has some significant here, your maintenance, your fuel costs, the risk of driving a 45,000-pound vehicle. This one, and so did the implementation team. However, we have competing public safety needs. It was to staff all of our engine companies with 4 personnel. This would take us up to the Fire Protection Association model. Highly desirable place to be, but this was a proposal that cost you have in your report. If we were to take all of the matrix implementation recommendations, all of them $1 million a year, in the end, the implementation team really focused on what is the practical. So there you have it, the Reading Fire Department, and again, thank you for the opportunity. Any questions?
Yes, thank you.
Any great presentation. I can't resist the opportunity to talk about the Anderson ladder truck. She is a beauty. I watched them training on her yesterday, and thank you for pointing that out. We're very proud of it,
And
Nick.
if I might add, the Tier 0 recommendation of enhancing aid, I'm already in talk with Chief Young and Anderson about reciprocal use of that resource.
I'm glad to hear it, because it's a pricey piece of equipment that needs to be used.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you very much. More questions, Mr. Moody?
Yeah, I just want to compliment Chief Gray. As he pointed out, there were a number of them that are very important. And I just thought that Chief Gray was a good partner in our discussions, recognizing the balance.
Thank you very much. Excellent presentation. Chief Paletti.
Morning. So the Reading Police Department has a very large portion, obviously, of the blueprint. Really, the kind of the consultant had some different philosophies, not on how many people should be added, a little bit there, but more on where they should be placed. And I think you'll see that in most of the concur. So we'll go through those, and I'll be able to explain to you exactly, where we see the best enhancement of the Reading Police Department, and where those people should be placed. So our portion of that interagency master plan that was discussed earlier is a sergeant for interagency coordination, basically a representative that will work with homeless charities and do the outreach and the interagency coordination. I just don't feel that a sergeant is necessary to do this. We have been operating for the last year and a half when we had the homeless outreach team with a police officer. We have been operating with our enhanced code enforcement over the last year with that. So we would recommend moving the sergeant's position to a police officer and assigning a police officer to do the homeless outreach and coordination like we were doing before. As far as the officer training for homelessness, we had a curriculum that was just taught at Sacramento Police Department, so we should be able to implement that shortly. So we concur with that part of it, and it's a combination where it's the homeless into that, so we have that curriculum, should have it tomorrow. Enhancing field services, council added 4 positions out of the reserve, and that created our neighborhood police unit. And you'll see neighborhood police unit as we go through the recommendations. They wanted to make those 4 positions permanent, but they didn't allocate any funding. They called that a Tier 0 recommendation. Well, that's $620,000 a year that's got to come from somewhere. So the implementation team actually concurs with maintaining those 4 positions, but obviously they have to be a Tier 1 recommendation because the funding has to come from somewhere. The matrix is recommending that we add a sergeant and an officer to backfill those positions from patrol, because his recommendation, as you'll see later, on what that NPU should look like is different and where the people come from. No need to backfill those positions in patrol because they were never allocated there. They were allocated to the neighborhood police unit. In Tier 3, he's recommending a sergeant be added to patrol for relief. I don't believe that that's necessary. I think the supervision that we have in patrol right now is adequate, and that could be an officer that would be working in patrol. I don't need more supervisors there at present. In Tier 3, he's recommending adding 2 officers to traffic. I think that should be added, but I think it should be a Tier 2. We are struggling right now in the city of Reading with driving under the influence. We didn't meet a single one of our targets last year for our OTS grant. Our injury rates and our death rates for DUI accidents are up, and we think that we need to get some more traffic enforcement back to patrol. Coupled with the other things that we're recommending to patrol staffing, I think that we would have a good impact on traffic safety within this community. And then he's recommending adding a officer to patrol per tier, and I think we need 8 in patrol. That adds, brings up the minimum staffing of each shift and gives us more adequate patrol staffing to deal with the rising calls for service that we've seen over the last few years of about 11,000 calls for service per year. On the Creative Community Response Team, his recommendation was that we use community service officers to address and be the primary responding units to homeless nuisance type calls as he listed it. They're not going to be placed in a position of danger in dealing with a element of our community that oftentimes is struggling with mental illness and struggling with drug addiction issues, and quite frankly fight with our officers quite often. That is the best use of them. I think their best use is taking the report calls, taking the minor traffic accidents to free up police so that we can get the officers to go out and deal with those issues and to arrest criminals for their criminal behavior. I don't believe at this point that we need a CSO supervisor that he's talking about. CSOs and patrols are supervised by the patrol sergeants, and I think we have adequate supervision for that. His recommendation is that we reassign 2 of our existing CSOs. I simply can't do that. They have integral duties within the department. One is the liaison to the DA's office and the courts, putting the cases together and organizing a subpoena response so that we can prosecute criminals within the community. One does follow up on missing persons and coordinates with the detectives to talk to the victims and their families to make sure that they're doing fine. I don't think with 81 tons of trash removed a year that anyone wants to see Bob stop cleaning up what he's doing right now, or accumulate that 81 tons out to 5 years. That's 1 million pounds of trash that would be laying around. We need Bob out there doing that and keeping our community clean. So the last one that we do is our abandoned vehicle abatement CSO. She removes about 1,500 cars a year from the streets of the city of Reading that are abandoned and left to be blight in our community. So we need those 4 to report. I think with a couple of additions, we can add 10 CSOs to patrol would be my recommendation. I want to add another CSO to do community cleanup and perhaps some code enforcement embedded with the neighborhood police unit to assist them as they're doing hotel enforcement and things like the Reading Inn case that we did. We really need our CSO back to do crime prevention. We're putting out information we're getting out to the community through nextdoor.com, which we'll start using hopefully shortly, Facebook, Twitter, and those types of information that are going out to the department. And then when we implement a body camera program, we'll need a body that's going to coordinate all of that data. And we want to assign a CSO to the professional standard sergeant. She'll manage the data, and the sergeant will do the evaluation of the officer performance that's in them. So I think that will work very well. So overall, we're looking at 13 CSOs is what we're recommending. The Create a Special Enforcement Team that's in here, this is the NPU. His recommendation was a sergeant, a corporal, and 1 officer. That's a pretty well supervised officer. But adding additional officers to that in tier 4 and 5. Currently, we have a sergeant, a corporal, and 4 officers in our NPU. It's been a very successful format since January. They're pushing 300 arrests since January. They were integral in the cases made against the Reading Inn and trying to clean up that property, as well as several other major projects that they're working on. So we're very happy with the format we have now. We don't suggest changing that. We do concur, and there's a cost associated with that. So yes, we concur, but it needs to be a tier 1 recommendation. This is actually the optional dictation software. This is something that's been evolving since the Matrix report came out. We looked at this about 1.5 years ago, and it became cost prohibitive. The leading dictation software company that we're talking to is changing how they're doing their licensing and how they're doing their integration. So this is something that may continue to evolve, and that dictation software company we learned yesterday is actually in discussions with Spillman Technologies, who is our selective records management report writing system that we're going to be moving to, and hopefully there'll be a good integration between that dictation software, and it won't take, like I'm discussing here, where you need from a central license through the records management system that we're already purchasing and putting in place for the county. So that may actually make it available not just to us, but to the sheriff and Anderson and the others as well. So we'll continue to monitor that and continue to look forward, but I think it has some really good promise to go forward in the future. There's maybe some cost involved in that. Our shift schedule, he made a couple of recommendations. Obviously, he bases all of this off of that proactive time. And the proactive time, I think, is a good study when you're looking at efficiency of shift schedules. I still have a little bit of disagreement with him, but not looking at response time as a measure of community service from a shift as well. But one of his recommendations in Tier 1 was to move to a consistent 12-hour shift throughout the department and just negotiate with the Reading Police Officers Association that they're going to work a straight 42-hour work week with no compensation for the extra 2 hours. That's just simply not likely to happen, so we're not recommending going that direction. If they worked a 42-hour work week and you added 2 hours of overtime embedded in their paycheck, that's a cost of $427,000 a year that's not accounted for in the plan either. And I just don't see that as viable use of those monies. We can also go back to the 10-hour shift schedule we were working before. That's a viable shift. It doesn't give the team policing and some of the other advantages of the shift schedule we have now. So what we've done when we rebid the current shift schedule, we have data on what the 10-hour plan looks like. We have data on what the 10-12 split, our current shift without the swing shift. We've actually adjusted our personnel to put the swing shift back into the weekends, and we've adjusted the hours of that swing shift earlier into that 10 to 10 lack of proactive time arena where we have our serious problem. And then we'll do an evaluation of each of those shift schedules, not just from a proactive time, but from a response time, and judge which shift schedule actually gives the best service to the community. We can make that assessment, and that's the shift schedule that we'll go forward with. We know that the 10 plan will work. We're just trying to see what the best efficiency is if we stay with a 10-12 swing. Augment proactive capabilities. He had actually 2 recommendations relative to our investigation section. The first was to create a special investigations unit to augment investigations relative to organized crime, as he called it. Really, this was my discussion with him over a vice unit. I think a sergeant and 3 investigators is a little bit of overkill in this arena. I think that we can add investigators to one of our current sections, like our night squad detectives or our sex crimes unit, and get the investigations and the capability of that team to go out and be able to do massage parlor inspections and vice type operations while they're still doing other duties. And the night squad seems to be where investigations thinks that would be best. That is our gang intelligence unit at night. So since there's a link between gang activity and prostitution and drugs, they can work with CENTIF, and I think that we can get that. We recommend the 2 investigators be placed there. Supervision and investigations right now I think is adequate. I don't need another sergeant. I think we can put it under one of the sergeants that exists. Creating a youth and family services unit to augment the current staff. His recommendation was a sergeant, a detective, and 2 CSOs. Once again, that's a person's crime issue. I don't need more supervision. The investigator, we just don't send domestic violence cases very often to investigations. Because there's a known suspect, they're mostly handled by patrol. Both one safe place and the DA's office have victim support, and we believe that they do a great job, and it would be 2 positions transition to patrol. And we'd like to see the 3 investigators total added to our property differ. His idea is you don't put people in property crimes because the solve rate is low, but I think our citizens deserve to have their burglaries and other property crimes investigated, and we're not quite ready to claim surrender on that one. So that's where we would put those investigators if they were made available to us. And that is all the
Perfect, thank you, Chief Moretti. Questions for Chief Moretti? Mr. Mooney.
Thank you, Chair Deckamy. Chief, thank you for the presentation, very good. I just want to comment on a couple issues that you brought up. First, not needing more supervisors, but more officers and CSOs. I think sometimes what stems from this is unusual for bigger cities where officers, on most calls they go to, there's a supervisor who shows up, and then a lot of times there's lieutenants in the field as well who then coordinate bigger efforts. The Reading Police Department over the years, further down the chain, so lieutenants may be in charge of a shift, but they also have a lot of administrative work, sergeants, assignments and duties as well. The police department has always expected their officers to step up and to be able to coordinate. So I agree with that. I'm sure if you need, adding 6 more supervisors to this program. I think your officers are very capable with your direction to the CSOs. So I think that was really important that you recognize that, and I think putting officers in control. For instance, you talked about proactive time. Creating 3 or 4 minutes or 5 minutes of proactive time in an hour or more for an officer. He's going to work on a special project, or even under traffic, as you talked about, where they need to work on a particular intersection, open time to work traffic. And I think that's why your plan creates that time for those. And then certainly the CSOs is a critical part of creating that proactive time, in that, as you mentioned, they will handle not in progress calls, but just report calls. They certainly can handle a lot of the traffic accidents, and our citizens need, they just the person at fault is the one who's responsible. I just think that's a better use. You mentioned just briefly at the very end about the, I think you called it the Youth and Family Services Unit, and you mentioned domestic, I'm sure it's where you're going, but domestic violence is still very important to the Reading Police Department, and you still have a lot of other, such as one safe place and so.
Correct. The difference is that because it's a known suspect, most officers, so therefore it goes to the DA's office from them. There's not a lot of follow-up that needs to be made on that because of the known suspect, unless there's great bodily injury. Domestic violence cases to the detectives, unless there's obviously a sex crime or something else that needs follow-up. So I think investigators can be better utilized in other places.
One thing I do want to comment briefly on is the scheduling plan. You mentioned what you're going to implement, which I think I'm very interested to see what the results are for that and how that works out for you. I do know the 410 policing approach, if you restructure a little bit, but my compliments to you for being open to trying to, so great job on that. And then finally, I just want to say, a although the consultant, I think that was all part of opening up the discussion to make the chief certainly, but as the implementation team to look at different, where that might take us. Someone we agreed with, someone we didn't, but it did make us at least take a hard hire or the jail, and I commend you for doing that, chief, and then bringing back a plan that you feel fits your what you and the city manager and the city council are responsible for doing and want to do.
Thank you, Chair Giacomini. Chief Paletti, thank you for your presentation. I have had one comment, and that is, I find your candor refreshing. Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
Excellent comment. I want to find it's really helped all of us work together in a real proactive, positive manner. And I think the implementation team deserves and willingness to work together. So thank you. Mr. Mooney.
Yeah, I just want to add that obviously the elephant in the room was Mr. Stormer talked about earlier, Supervisor Ball asked about it, but it is the revenue side. And as is mentioned clearly, it's something that's going to be brought up and talked about later on at the city council meeting. I was asked the other day, well, they're looking at the sales in the city of Reading. And the question was, well, why not the county? I think as we went through this process, it was clear to us that most of the services being generated and being considered were going to occur in the city of Reading. And as the sheriff has mentioned many times to me, and also I'm sure it's led to that, the Reading Police Department puts about 70% of the people in the jail, so that they have the major user there. This is that most of the people who live in the county shop in the city of Reading, and that's where they're going to pay their sales tax. And so it'll be part of generating additional dollars that will be used for part of the county services, whether it be the jail, the mental health, and those services. So excluding a group, recognizing where those dollars would come from. And I think that's critical.
Thank you.
Thank you. Excellent point. Mr. Lees.
Thank you, Chair Giacomini and members of the board. Completed number one, which was to accept the presentation. Number two, I would ask the board to consider passing other considerations.
Yes, I would make a motion that we team moving forward.
Second.
Thank you. We have a motion and a second. Mr. Ball.
So under discussion, about the finances involved, and while I'm talking about that, Supervisor Modi representing this board on that, it's well thought out, really appreciate it. I'm going to borrow a line from Kua Gooding Jr. though, and can you show me the money? You were helpful in breaking down a portion of it, what you're going to be recommending to the city council from a use fee, or whatever we're calling that today, and how that might be divided.
Correct, my spreadsheet if you need.
Okay. Maybe thank you.
Okay.
Or if you want to take it first, that's okay. Thank you, Madam Chair. Appreciate the invitation to expand on that topic. So, as we discussed earlier, I think for ease of discussion, we'll call it sales tax today. The technical term is a transactions and use tax. So it's what the state of California and the state statute refers to it as. I think for most of us, it's a sales tax. There are some minor distinctions between the Bradley-Byrne sales tax and what's being discussed this afternoon by the city council, but I think for ease of conversation, we'll refer to it as a sales tax. So the estimate from the implementation team and from the City of Reading Finance Department is that a 1/2 cent sales tax would generate approximately $11 million annually in new revenue. That's in 2016 dollars. The implementation team did look in detail at both one-time expenses being recommended that you heard about today, as well as ongoing expenses. And we believe that the plan that you heard today and have a motion on the floor to consider at the moment, that there's adequate resources within that $11 million to fund the program as you discussed today. That includes one-time funds, construction funds for the jail expansion. I mentioned those numbers earlier. Today's dollars about $5.5 million of one-time funds, both for the additional jail space, once that space is created, as well as an allocation of $1 million annually for matched with $1 million of existing resources the county with the board ultimately would redirect. So a total of $2 million from redirected resources in the county of Shasta. Those are the main topics that would pertain to the county. Chief Bray and Chief Paletti referenced the recommendations that fall up to the Reading Fire Department, and and within the Reading Police Department. That
Mr. Starvin, thank you so much for clarifying that. I think it's important that we understand exactly what we're talking about.
Pleasure.
That real clear. Appreciate it.
Thank you very much.
Just one comment before Mr. Starman steps away, the meeting about sort of percentage for different services we're talking about, 50, 30, 20. You want to
both one-time construction funds as well as ongoing revenue. So let me, for easy discussion first, let me just kind of set related assets, namely the jail. Let me place those aside for a moment, but with regard to the ongoing operational expense for the new jail space, once that space is constructed, for the first 64 beds and then the additional 64 beds within the Justice Center, a total of 128. I mentioned earlier, if I can round, the operating costs there would be about $2.2 million annually. In addition to that, $1 million being proposed for mental health services. So about just under 1/3 of the total revenues being proposed for county-related services. And so obviously a form of tax sharing between the city and the county, and the implementation team strongly supports that concept that we're all in this together. The criminal justice system obviously is a continuum that includes, starting through the justice system, the courts, and ultimately incarceration. So the tax itself, if ultimately Reading Council chooses to place it on the ballot, of course, ultimately it's the voters that will decide whether to approve such a tax. But hypothetically, if that came into play, I think the implementation team is quite confident or strongly recommends that the money be used to both to support city-related services, but also county-related services, because they do go together hand in glove. So that's a proposal. So roughly about, I'd say, about 1/3 of the revenue would be used for county, what most people would consider traditional county-related services.
Excellent, thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Follow-up, Mr. Bonner?
I do have follow-up, but I can, somebody else go first.
Mr. Kehoe?
For me?
Mr. Starr.
I'm sorry.
Thank you for attending the meeting today. Assuming that the city council concurs with the recommendation to move forward relative to sales tax, who would be voting on this?
So as was mentioned a little bit earlier in the discussion, so the recommendation from the implementation team is that the sales tax would be decided by the voters of the city of Reading County, and the projections are based upon that assumption.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you. A follow-up from Mr. Baugh?
Thank you, Chair. We're proposing a simple measure that would require 50% plus one vote for the tax itself.
Correct. So the proposal that the Reading City Council will consider this afternoon at its meeting at 2 p.m. will be similar to the City of Anderson model that was used approximately 1 year ago, 18 months ago. Other cities and counties have used that model as well. So essentially it is essentially 2 ballot measures. The first would be a question to the voters: shall the City of Reading implement a 1/2 cent treasury measure that says if the voters approve such a sales tax measure, should the money be used for the ideas that you heard today?
And the advisory measure, I'll just point out, and not trying to be self-serving here, but very important, the ballot measure argument in favor of really identify and convince the community that those funds will be used exactly as has been presented. My wife wrote that ballot measure, and it struck home with the community. And the city of Anderson has followed through, and they have performed exactly the promises that they offered, have been kept. And in fact, more so, they have actually implemented more. The POP team wasn't even included as a part of that initial measure, and they actually began hiring prior to the collection of those first taxes. In the motion that's been made, while I think in concept we're talking about the financing portion as well, but it doesn't really say that we're supporting the tax proposal. And I just like to say, I think that we should say whether or not we support it. I'm going to make my position clear. I have been supportive all along for a tax measure. Publicly have supported that for over 2 years now. I don't make I have not hidden that. I believe that we need to be supportive. We need to communicate that this board is overall our servants on the Reading City Council, that we are supportive as well. I do believe that this is a positive, proactive, representatives on the county and in the city are supportive of this as well. So there you have it.
Appreciate it.
And I don't have any more. Mr. Starman has someone else does. I'll let him sit down, but I do have some comments.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Appreciate it.
Coming from transactions and use tax, but there is additional additional. Existing county, for instance, in the mental health division, and I think we should, make that clear. So Mr. Lees, I'll ask you to.
Yeah, in play, first of all, that certainly we've already funded within the county resources, as well as not come from this transition use tax, but come from dollars that will be set aside from crisis stabilization unit. Just to reiterate that certainly, if we can get $1 million, operation could be about $2 million annually. And so with that being said, if we can get $1 million, then we can use that for grants. But we also have internal resources that can help then to redirect that will match that $1 million operation cost.
Thank you. I guess it's clear that we just let people know that the county is trying to participate for whatever level we can. Because, as Mr. Starman alluded to, it is, in essence, there's definitely a need in our community. Understand that as a region, we have to start working together to one other jurisdiction and let them deal with it. I applaud Reading for being willing to at least discuss this later on today with some of their members and our members here. And I believe next week to start that whole discussion about a whole host of issues. And I think that I think that what the committee wanted to do was develop a plan that we thought could solve a lot of needs and concerns and have funding for it. And I think the issue here is I support the idea of giving the citizens a plan, and that's the issue at hand here, is that the community has to decide either they accept it in November.
Perfect, thank you, Mr. Moody. Mr. Kehoe.
With one of them, relative to the city of Reading taking the initiative and stepping up and working with the county operation to the two other cities in Shasta County, and ask for contributions from those.
We have asked both the city of Radnor and the city of Shasta Lake to participate with us as it relates to discussion.
And I'll just